All right, so Plato's Symposium is essentially about a big drinking party. And we get Aristodemus, Socrates, Agathon, Pausanias, Aristophanes, Zemicus, Phaedras, and Alcibiades. They all come together for this party. But they decide that a lot of them had drunk too much the night before. And so they didn't really want to imbibe anymore tonight, and so they decided that instead of the usual music and drink, that they would make speeches. And so each participant is supposed to make a speech in honor of love. Now when we look at these speeches, they range from a very low base concept of love up to a very high lofty concept of love. Now, of course, Socrates is going to offer the best speech. He's not initially going to be named as the best speech maker, but for our purposes, of course, his is clearly the best speech because he talks about the highest order of love, the culminating speech, and so this is what we're going to pay the most attention to. Now, the symposium is going to open with Apollodorus speaking to an unnamed friend and relaying the story of this now famous party. Apollodorus had gotten the information secondhand from Aristodemus, but nonetheless he's going to offer this tale in very exquisite detail. After dinner, Pausanias, he says, hey, I've drunk too much the evening before. He asks everybody to forego drinking for the evening and to be entertained instead by speeches. Socrates was not there right at the beginning. Socrates was kind of late for the party, and so he wasn't included in this vote. But Zemicus says it wouldn't matter. We know that Socrates is equal to any occasion, whether he's drunk or sober. Now keep that point in mind, because at the end of the dialogue, the party is going to be crashed by a bunch of heavy drinkers, partiers, revelers, and there's a lot of drinking that's going to take place. The wine is going to flow very freely. Socrates is going to end up drinking everybody under the table and then going about his business completely unfazed. So Zemicus is going to make the suggestion that the partygoers entertain themselves by delivering orations in praise of the god of love. And the very first speaker to present is going to be Phaedras. Now Phaedras is going to offer a very typical, naive, uninteresting sort of speech in which he claims that love is always a positive thing, a thing that inspires virtue in those people that possess it. After this, Aristodemus says that he forgot several of the speeches that came by that were even worse than the one that was given by Phaedras. And so they left them unrelayed. The next speech that was remembered with any type of detail belonged to Pausanias. Now Pausanias complained about Phaedras' speech, and he began an homage with the distinction between a heavenly and a common form of love. Now this is important because it's sort of a precursor for Socrates' comments. As you might expect, Socrates is going to be talking from the standpoint of realm of being, realm of becoming. He's going to be incorporating ideas from the realm of being into all of this, the theory of the forms. And so here we're getting through Pausanias this connection to Socrates' ideas by talking about the higher heavenly form and the lower common form. Now he goes on to say that actions themselves are neither good nor bad, but they become good or bad by virtue of the manner in which they're performed. When he speaks about Aphrodite's love, he's speaking about sex as an inferior type of love, a love that's careless, a love that's vulgar. And he says that this lower level of love is directed towards both sexes, male and female, and it's directed towards those of low character. But there's also a higher form of love, a superior form of love, which is enduring and is directed towards young males. Now, our modern sensibilities look at this and we raise questions about homosexual nature, what the relationship was between older and younger men in the Greek world. And it is true that their view of the world was a little bit different. Their view of sexuality was different. We have to remember, for example, that the Olympic Games originally were performed in the nude because the male form, the male body, was considered to be something of beauty that should be honored and revered and respected. It is true that there are homosexual relationships that are taking place during this time. However, that's not really what Pausanias is getting at here. That lower base form of love, that's going to have heterosexual and homosexual relationships. That's that base level that they're talking about. When he's talking about the higher level, this is a mental form of love. There is that sense of knowledge that comes with age, and there is that sense of innocence that comes with youth. And the youth clings on to the older male to gain that sense of knowledge and understanding, and there is the love that comes to the younger male because of that sense of desire to learn, because of that desire to become the better individual, the higher person. So that's really what he's getting at. That superior form of love doesn't have anything to do with base sexuality. It has to do with a mental love, a mental picture. And so that's the speech that we get in this case from Pausanias. If we take a look, page 149, it says, "Those who are inspired by this love turn to the male and delight in him who is the more valiant and intelligent nature. Anyone may recognize the pure enthusiasts in the very character of their attachments, for they love not boys, but intelligent beings whose reason is beginning to be developed, much about the time at which their beards begin to grow. And in choosing them as their companions, they mean to be faithful to them, and to pass their whole life with them, and be with them, and not to take them in their inexperience, and deceive them, and play the fool with them, or run away from them to one or the other of them. But the love of young boys should be forbidden by law, because their future is uncertain. They may turn out to be good or bad." Evil is the vulgar lover who loves the body rather than the soul. So again, we see Pausanias discounting and playing down the idea of the sexual forms of love on all sides, to see that concept of vulgar love as being evil and corrupt because it's not liberating to the soul. It's not about that elevation to the higher plateau, to what is greater, to what is more. Well, Pausanias is speaking almost entirely on the idea of homosexual love between a younger and an older male. And he complains here that society is beginning to disapprove of these relationships. But this is because of the excess of common love. So, such love is good because it's a heavenly form. It promotes virtue. And that's the key. Promoting virtue within the individual. Now, in the original order of the speeches, Aristophanes was supposed to speak next. But Aristophanes has the hiccups. He says he's had the hiccups from eating or something. And the something seems to be from having to listen to bad speeches. So, Zemicus is going to go next. Zemicus is a doctor, and so he's going to speak a very dry, scientific tract that discusses the medical profession as that which masters the workings of eros within the body. And he says this is done by bringing opposites into harmony with one another. So essentially what we have is a medical explanation of the form of heterosexual love. But then, after him, Aristophanes has recovered from his hiccups, and he's going to give us what is really the comic masterpiece of this dialogue. Now, Aristophanes, of course, is the great playwright who, amongst other plays, he writes one called The Clouds, in which he makes fun of Socrates and treats Socrates as the great sophist who is teaching people to say that up is down and left is right and things of that nature. Well, anyway, in this piece, Aristophanes is going to explain that in the beginning there were not two sexes as we have now, male and female, but there were actually three. The third one being the original, which is a union of the two, the male and the female. And so you see the image that's being depicted on the screen there. And so the way he describes it, we have this body that is both the male and the female conjoined, brought together. And so you have 4 arms and 4 legs and 2 sets of sexual organs, 2 faces. It is a rather bizarre looking creature that's being presented there. But he says that at one point these are going to be cut in twain. And so the male and the female are going to be severed from each other, thus ending that particular species of being. Now what happens, he says, is that once the individuals are chopped in two, there is only the male, there is only the female. And individuals go around trying to find their other half. And this is kind of interesting because this is a terminology that we still use today. We still have this idea that the person is looking for their soulmate, that the person is looking for their other half or their better half. We still get those phrases to this day. But that's what love ultimately is in Aristophanes' sense. It's that love or that desire to complete oneself, to ultimately make oneself whole. And so we are always searching for our better half. We're always searching for our greater self. Agathon, the poet, speaks next, and he really says very little. He says that love is beautiful, it's youthful, it's virtuous, and so on. The gods are characterized in our image. Things of that nature. Just basically using a lot of poetic fluff language that doesn't really get us anywhere. Examples of things. But as we know for the ancient Greek, we're not interested in samples or examples of things. We're looking at what is the real core root of things. And so Agathon gets us nowhere near it, but he speaks pretty. Finally, we come to Socrates. Socrates, the great philosopher, everybody's been anxiously awaiting to hear what he has to say. And in fact, earlier on, remember how I said that Socrates was not there when the initial vote to do this was taken, but his friends said, oh, it's okay, Socrates will be down with this. Socrates is always in it. He's always ready for it. And when Socrates comes in, he says, of course I'll speak on this. This is one of the few subjects that I know something about. So remember how Socrates is always going around professing his own ignorance. He says, I'm trying to discover what justice is. I'm trying to discover what piety is. I'm trying to discover what truth is. I have no idea. He's always professing his own ignorance. I mean, that's why the Oracle of Delphi considered him to be such a wise individual. But in actuality, he says right here, I know something about this issue. And it's kind of interesting to see why it is that he knows. And we'll take a look at Socrates' speech and find out why in the next video.